All right, so a couple weeks back, I had made a video about how guilt has basically stopped working on men. And what I did was I referenced Alexander Grace's video that he put out that was called The Reluctant Enemy. And just threw my hat into the ring, gave my own commentary on it. And of course, the comment section was just jam-packed with men basically saying, yeah, I remember the exact moment that I realized that these shame tactics and the labels that are thrown at me, they don't work anymore. They've lost their potency. And this is what I went through, yada, yada, yada. The moral indignation just bounces right off and lands at my feet now. And I thought that was really cool. And if you haven't seen that video, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to link it down below, and I'm also going to link it at the end of this video. Okay, so, but the short version is that a growing number of men, they've essentially crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, right? The old tools that were used to keep men in line, they just don't work the way that they used to, right? But here's the question that I didn't, I got like a eyelash or something. But here's the question that I didn't answer in that video. So here's the part I've been sitting on, okay? If guilt stopped working, and it has, what did they reach for next? Right? Because they didn't just put the playbook down and give up. No, they didn't. Nobody gives up control willingly. They don't. So what's the new play? You might be asking. Well, let me go ahead and just back up and give you the foundation. So because if you haven't watched the last video, which I recommend that you do before watching this, like I said, I'll link it down below. So just go look in the video description. It'll be right there. I'll provide the link. Just give it a little clickaroo and watch it, and then you can watch this. But that way you have the context, because Alexander's, his video, it really maps out the arc that a lot of men went through. And it's worth walking through again briefly, of course, because it provides the context needed for everything I'm about to say. So if you want to stick along and feel free. It's your prerogative. But yeah, so young men, they don't start out cynical. I didn't at all. I was idealistic, and that's how a lot of men start out. They start out very idealistic because they believe in fairness, because a lot of men were raised to believe in fairness. And when they're presented with historical injustices, right, whether real or a fabrication or an alteration of history, men with any conscience, they look at that and say, yeah, that's wrong. That is objectively wrong. Let's not have that. And so what do? They sign up and become what I guess the culture calls an ally, right? I hate that term. But it's a very lefty term now. But for a while, to them, that feels like the right thing to do. Of course. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But then something starts happening that those men, they didn't see coming. They get blindsided, right? They notice that the goalposts move constantly. And it's not in big obvious ways at first. It's these small incremental ways. Right? And every time they comply and hold their tongue or apologize or perform humility that they don't actually feel, the bar shifts again. And at some point, the man who has been earnestly trying to do the right things, he runs and all he does is run a simple calculation in his head. He looks at what he's put in, what he's invested, and what he's gotten back. He does a simple ROI analysis, a return on investment. He looks at how he's been treated despite his compliance, and he starts to notice a pattern, right? And Alexander calls it basic pattern recognition. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's not misogyny or bitterness towards women. That's not what it is. It's just the same cognitive function that it keeps you from touching a hot stove twice, right? you experience something enough times that your brain starts predicting the outcome before it happens. And once it's locked in, guilt stops working. Because here's the thing about guilt. It requires you to believe that you did something wrong, right? A man who has just simply done the math doesn't believe that anymore. He's looked at the overwhelming evidence and concluded that the issue wasn't him in the first place. It was the systems around him, right? And that's where my last video ended, more or less. So guilt stopped working on men, but it didn't end there. Okay? Here's what I want to talk about today, which is the shift of what happened after guilt stopped working on men. Because the people running this thing, they're not stupid. All right? They're many things, but stupid is not one of them. So, and when one tool stops producing results, they just reach for another one. And the first tool they reached for was identity. And the difference between guilt and identity as a weapon is very significant. So I just want to spend just a minute on it, because guilt, when it works, it attaches to behavior, right? You did something specific, you're being held accountable for that specific thing. And the message, the implied message is change the behavior and you're fine, which means guilt, at least in its original form, left the man himself intact, right? You know what I'm saying? It was simply simply a correction mechanism, right? It didn't eliminate the man. It didn't eliminate anything in particular. It was a correction mechanism. But when they switch from behavior to identity, the message changed. It changed completely, right? Masculinity itself got renamed as the problem. The word toxic got attached to it the way that you'd attach a warning label to something hazardous, right? And what that implies is that there's no behavior you can change to fix it, because you're not being told what you did is wrong. You're being told what you are is wrong. And it's worked for a while. It's worked for a long while, right? Because you would see men, they apologize for existing in certain spaces, and they performed emotional vulnerability on command and processed their feelings and their emotions out loud, because the culture said that's what a healthy man does. That's what a healthy man is supposed to do. But identity attacks, they do have a limit. You can only tell a man that he is the problem for so long before shame stops working on him, and that turns into defiance. And a man who sees what's being done to him, he looks very different from a man who's still carrying shame with him. The man who's carrying shame, he's still trying to repair himself. And then the other man who stopped accepting the premise that something is wrong with him, well, yeah, he looks completely different. So, but once the personal emotional tools start losing their grip, well, the next move was institutional, right? And this is the one that I think men are starting to, of course, they're catching up to it, but that's the thing is the institutional route. It's quieter and more covert. It's not the same as being called toxic to your face, right? You can see someone pointing a finger at you, but you can't always see a system working against you, especially when that system tells you that the problem is you. Okay, and Alexander, what he lays out. He lays this out, and he's right when he says, from the school to the workplace to the courtroom, they've spent the last few decades operating inside these systems that were redesigned, right? They were redesigned slowly and methodically to reward a communication style and an emotional processing style that most men just don't naturally have, right? Men and women are genuinely different in how they process and express emotion. And this system got rebuilt and redesigned around one template. So, and it would be that gynocentric template. And so, yeah, so a man, he walks into a therapist's office, and then right away, he's inside a framework that evaluates him by a set of standards that he wasn't designed to meet. And so, yeah, in this framework, he's encouraged to express himself and be vulnerable and process his feelings out loud. And when he does it the way that men actually do it, right? They name the problem, they process a solution, or they propose a solution, and then they move on. Well, he gets told that's avoidance, right? That's not healthy. That's avoidance. And if there's and if they're there because of, I don't know, a custody case, because of some legal proceeding, and because someone with authority over his life required him to be there, and so the performance in that room has real consequences for him. And so the man who appears stoic, who doesn't cry on cue and who doesn't produce the emotional output that the evaluator is looking for, well, that man can potentially lose things, sometimes even his children. Just think about that for a minute. A man doesn't get to process grief the way he actually processes grief, because the institution that's evaluating his fitness as a parent was built on a different model than his own. And nobody frames this as a bias against him. It's framed as him failing to meet the standard, right? As him being emotionally unavailable, as him needing to do the work, right? The standard itself never gets questioned. And that's Schrodinger's feminism. The concept, it's very simple, and the application is maddening. It's the ability to occupy two completely opposite positions at the same time, to be simultaneously empowered and victimized depending on which one is more useful in the moment. And so a woman can be, so what that means is a woman can be fully capable, equally qualified, deserving of every opportunity right up until the moment where being a victim serves a better purpose. And I want to be really clear about what this does to men who are trying to engage honestly, because it creates a situation where there is no correct behavior. Because that's the thing, if you're too helpful, then oh well, you're condescending, or if you're not helpful enough, then you're indifferent. If you decide to be a leader, to lead, then you're domineering and controlling. But if you follow, then you're passive, right? So, and then if you try to assert yourself, then yeah, you're aggressive. You get what I'm saying. And so there's no position you can take that isn't available to be used against you, is the point. So, but men are clever, and we've figured this out. That's what men do. We figure things out through experience, usually. So you get burned enough times, and then you start to recognize a pattern. Pattern recognition, man. One way or another, right? Someone ran that Schrodinger's play on you, either in a relationship or at work or maybe in the courtroom. And boom, the pattern's right there. Plain as day. And what happens is it changes how you see the whole chessboard. And so the problem is that the moment that men start naming this pattern out loud, they start saying, hey, I'm noticing something. Right? The moment that they say, hey, wait a second, I'm seeing something here. This seems structurally rigged, right? The knee-jerk reaction, the response that is to call them paranoid or radicalized or something, right? To pathologize their observation. And that is, if you think about it, the cleanest version of the trap there is. The mechanism that produces the damage also produces the label that dismisses anyone who points to the damage. So it's a closed loop. A man can't win inside it at all. The only way to not lose is to stop playing, right? So just leave the casino. And so this is the newest move, and I think it tells you more than anything, right? When guilt stopped working, what they did was they moved to identity attacks, and then when identity attacks stopped working, they leaned on institutions. And when men started quietly stepping back from all of it, right? They opting out and going their own way and choosing their own peace over this soul-sucking performance. Once again, the knee-jerk reaction or response was to call even that a threat, right? To treat withdrawal as a form of extremism and frame a man just wanting out as him being radicalized. Makes no sense. But I understand the tactic. But just sit with that for a second, because it tells you what the real issue is, right? The issue is that a man who stays engaged and compliant and performing and always trying, right? Dance, monkey, dance. He's useful, very useful, right? Because he can be steered. He can be directed whichever way the wind blows. Something can be extracted from him. But a man who simply decides, nah, I'm done, right? He's done with this, right? A man who goes to work and he comes home and he minds his own business and he's quietly just building a life for himself and has no need to prove anything to anybody. That man is harder to get a grip on because he's not feeding the machine. He's not emotionally available to be managed. And labels lose their power when a man, he decides that he's going to stop arranging his life around other people's approval. And that's what can't be tolerated, which is indifference. It's indifference. Because once a man stops caring about the approval and the guilt and the accusations, a lot of the control disappears with it. It's like Hevel. So, and yeah, when that control loses its grip, the arrangement starts working very differently. And so Alexander, he ends his video with something that I've been saying in different words for a long time. He says that feminism creates the very men it claims to hate. And that's true. If you push men out long enough and treat what they are with enough contempt, and you create men who decide that they can do without what's being offered. Let's do without it. Men who looked at the deal in front of them, and then all they did was just weigh the cost and just said, no thanks, I'm good. That's it. That's really the outcome. It's just cause and effect. You do a thing long enough, eventually it produces a result. Go figure. So, I guess here's where I want to leave this, because I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm just trying to lay out what I see. That's what I do. I enjoy doing that, and I hope it's helpful. I'm seeing that it's helping a lot of people, so I'm continuing to do it. But yeah, the system had a primary tool: guilt, right? Moral intimidation, the threat of social consequences for noncompliance. And it worked for a very, very, very long time on a lot of men. And then it stopped working. And then the men stopped working on... and then the men that it stopped working on, well, what happened was they got labeled as the problem. And so that's when they decided to use identity as that next tool. And then after that, of course, then it was institutional capture. And then they used, of course, the Schrodinger's trap. And now they're calling male withdrawal as a pipeline to extremism. That's the current position. Men who just want to be left alone are the problem. We don't want any smoke, man. We don't want no beef. We just want to be left alone. We want to be left in peace. That's it. And I think they're running out of tools, because every tool that they've reached for since guilt stopped working it's just run into the same wall, which is men who have already been through the cycle, right? Men who have that pattern recognition, and they're no longer naive. So they can see the mechanism, and men who have looked at the Schrodinger's trap and understood it for exactly what it is. Well, it's just labels don't work on men who have already heard every label in the book, right? And institutions, they lose their leverage over men who have already lost what those institutions could take. And I'm not saying that this ends well. I'm not saying that there's a clean resolution on the other side of this. I'm just saying that the playbook is running out of pages. And the men who have been paying attention already know what the last few pages say. That's all I'm saying. One thing I want to be clear about before I wrap up this whole thing, because I know how it sounds from the outside, right? The men I'm talking about, the men that Alexander is talking about, most of them, they didn't start here. They started with good intentions. They wanted to love someone, to build something, to be fair. And they got shown through life experience what the deal actually was. And they made the only rational decision available to take, which is they stopped bending to their will. That's a man who paid attention and just drew a conclusion from the evidence. And if you're one of those men, and I know a lot of you are, I hope that you're doing it from a place of clarity and not bitterness, because there's a version of this where you see all of it clearly and you still choose to live well, right? You still choose decency and to protect what's yours. That's the version worth living. And the world is going to try really hard to make you think that it isn't possible. And I'm here to tell you it is.